President Trump's sweeping global tariffs for more than 90 countries have come into effect.
From a blanket minimum of 10% up to a high of 50%, with some hefty levies on some of the United States' major trading partners.
Let's control what we can control. Not what Donald Trump dictates, but what we can control.
On August 7th, U.S. Customs and Border Protection began collecting a sweeping new round of import tariffs signed by President Donald Trump. Rates now range from 10 to 50% on more than 60 countries. Brazil faces 50%. Switzerland is at 39%. Laos and Myanmar are at 40%. The European Union, Japan, and South Korea have 15% rates under new agreements, and the United Kingdom pays 10% after its own deal. Trump also announced a potential 100% tariff on foreign-made computer chips, with exemptions for companies building in the United States. Apple pledged a $100 billion investment, but the chip tariff is not yet formalized.
And what it means is, for America, their US levies on tariffs are now at the highest level for centuries. The president put out that post on social media saying billions of dollars in tariffs are now flowing into the United States of America.
Today, and according to a research center at Yale, the new tariffs could cost an average American family an extra $2,400 a year.
By July, the U.S. government had already collected over $150 billion from existing tariffs. Economists stress these costs fall on U.S. importers, often passed to consumers. June's Consumer Price Index showed prices rising for appliances, clothing, and furniture. Beyond North America, the same tariff logic is hitting other exporters. India faces a jump from 25% to a threatened 50% over Russian oil purchases, while South Africa warns of job losses as U.S. tariffs erode past advantages and push them to hunt thinner margin markets in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. The takeaway for Ottawa is simple. Countries are racing to reroute exports, so Canada's own diversification, already visible with Ontario grain shifting to Europe, has to move fast and stay disciplined.
Here in Canada, officials are already talking about the impact of tariffs because President Trump hit Canada with an increase of 35% tariffs last Friday.
Canada has been under these new pressures since August 1st, when Trump's administration raised tariffs on non-USMCA goods to 35%. Over 85% of bilateral trade remains tariff-free, but targeted sectors are feeling the pinch. Softwood lumber already faces heavy U.S. duties. Steel, aluminum, and certain manufactured goods now face added barriers. Some exporters are adjusting quickly. Ontario is both a major grain producer and a major grain buyer. The province imports large volumes of certain U.S. grains, making it the #1 customer for farmers in 35 to 40 American states, while also exporting Canadian-grown grain abroad. Now, with Trump's 35% tariff on non-USMCA goods, some of Ontario's own export shipments are being diverted away from the U.S. market and into Europe. That shift may help Canada diversify, but it also means U.S. grain farmers could lose one of their largest and most reliable customers if cross-border buying slows.
The Prime Minister was tight-lipped a day after saying he'd consider removing some counter-tariffs on American goods if it would help Canadian industries.
Prime Minister Mark Carney met in Ottawa with his cabinet and premiers to align the national approach. His message: keep talks with Washington open, avoid bad deals, and shield domestic industries from immediate harm. He has suggested removing some Canadian counter-tariffs if it benefits key sectors. Provincial leaders differ. Ontario's Doug Ford supports tariff-for-tariff measures and warns against trusting Trump. Saskatchewan's Scott Moe wants to reduce or drop counter-tariffs to lower domestic costs. Trade experts recommend keeping retaliation as a bargaining tool without escalating unnecessarily. Canada is also leaning on major industrial projects. Volkswagen's $7 billion Canadian PowerCo battery plant in St. Thomas is moving forward despite uncertainty, while procurement in other areas is strained. The Amherstburg fire chief cites delays and higher costs for a $3.1 million US-made fire truck with a 3-year build time due to tariffs and supply shortages. The coming weeks will reveal whether Trump formalizes the 100% chip tariff and how exemptions are defined. Canada may adjust counter-tariffs to protect vulnerable sectors while maintaining leverage. In the US, early price increases could spread, adding pressure to import-reliant industries. Trump's tariffs are both an economic weapon and a political signal. For Carney, the challenge is to protect Canada's economy while keeping options open. The choices made now will decide whether this standoff deepens or shifts toward a fragile new balance.
In a social media post, Trump said, quote, "The August 1st deadline is the August 1st deadline. It stands strong and will not be extended."
President Trump announced a tariff extension for Mexico this morning, posting to social media, "We have agreed to extend for a 90-day period."
On July 31st, the White House stood firm. No country would get an extension. August 1st was the final cutoff. That's what the world was told. No delays, no exceptions. The US would begin slapping 35% tariffs on goods from any nation that hadn't signed a new trade deal. But hours before the deadline, Trump changed his mind. Mexico got a 90-day extension. Canada didn't. This wasn't a small footnote. It revealed something deeper about how Trump's trade strategy is playing out and who it's really targeting.
Mexico is a very unique situation of all the other countries around the world because, of course, we share our southern border with Mexico.
The administration had spent weeks repeating that there would be no further delays. The tariffs were set in motion months ago and had already been pushed back once, from April to August. Officials said publicly that countries had time and the deadline would be enforced. But just before midnight, Trump suddenly spared Mexico. The reason? According to his spokesperson, Mexico is a unique case because of its shared southern border and recent cooperation on stopping drug and human trafficking. That framing sounds logical at first, but when Canada is brought into the picture, the logic starts to unravel. Canada also shares a long land border with the United States, over 5,500 miles, the longest undefended border in the world. The two countries are deeply tied through CUSMA, which still governs the majority of their trade. So why didn't Canada get the same 90-day grace period? Trump's team didn't offer a clear answer. What's clear, though, is that Canada wasn't even in the running for an exemption. Instead, the White House seemed focused on escalation. Just hours before tariffs took effect, Trump cited issues far outside trade, like Canada's recent recognition of Palestine, as a reason for breakdowns in negotiations. It had nothing to do with customs or commerce, and everything to do with politics. This wasn't about trade strategy, it was pressure politics, plain and simple. The same playbook Trump used on Brazil. Trump's decision to exempt Mexico wasn't rooted in a broader policy shift. It was a political calculation. While the administration framed it as a border issue, that logic crumbles under scrutiny. The US has critical economic and security ties with Canada too, especially in energy. Canada supplies over 4 million barrels of oil per day to the US, according to the US Energy Information Administration, making it America's top foreign energy source by far. Yet no exemption was offered. The real difference? Mexico agreed not to retaliate. Canada didn't. Prime Minister Mark Carney continued negotiations but refused to rush into a lopsided deal. And in Trump's world, standing firm doesn't earn you more time, it earns you a target.
Well, they have to pay a fair rate. That's all. It's very simple. They have been charging very, very high tariffs to our farmers. Farmers very badly. They've been treating our country very badly for years. And look, we like Canada. I love Canada. I have so many friends in Canada. But they've been very poorly led.
Despite the pressure, Canada didn't blink. Trump's move may have been designed to trigger panic in Ottawa, but it didn't. Officials stayed the course. No public outburst, no rushed announcement, no last-minute signature. While Mexico's deal is still undefined and its exemptions temporary, Canada is choosing clarity over chaos. Economists from multiple Canadian outlets have pointed out that over 80% of Canadian exports still flow tariff-free under CUSMA. That buys time, and more importantly, it gives leverage.
This guy will say something one day, and he'll wake up, and the cheese slips off the cracker, and then all of a sudden he goes the other way. And you're thinking, how do you deal with a guy like this?
What we saw on August 1st wasn't a rulebook being followed. It was one man's playbook, Where deadlines bend, allies are tested, and pressure is personal. Trump gave Mexico more time because it fit his optics. He denied Canada that same time because Ottawa didn't fold. But trade isn't just about theater. And Canada's refusal to rush shows that it understands that. In the end, that calm might prove to be its strongest move yet.
Yeah. So, August 1st is going to come. We haven't really had a lot of luck with Canada. We have the confines of a deal with China. But we haven't really, we don't have a deal with Canada.
It's the middle of summer, but the temperature between the United States and Canada has never been colder. Just days ago, President Trump signaled something few expected to hear. The U.S. may no longer be interested in reaching a new trade agreement with Canada. Instead, he hinted that tariffs alone might do the job. The message was simple: Washington is done waiting. As he boarded Air Force One for a trip to Scotland, Trump's decision marked a turning point. With the self-imposed August 1st deadline fast approaching, the United States is preparing to hit Canadian goods with a 35% tariff unless a new deal is signed. But on the other side of the border, Canada isn't blinking. Prime Minister Mark Carney and his team made their stance clear. Canada will not sign a bad deal, no matter the pressure. At the heart of the current standoff is a paradox. The Canada-US-Mexico Agreement, or CUSMA, is still in force. Under this agreement, over 90% of Canadian exports to the US face zero tariffs, assuming they comply with rules of origin. But the reality on the ground is shifting. Section 2, 32 tariffs on steel, aluminum, copper, and auto parts remain in place with some rates as high as 50%. And now, with the threat of an across-the-board 35% tariff, Canada faces a second layer of economic pressure that exists outside the CUSMA framework. These measures have had a chilling effect on Canadian industries and raised questions about whether the U.S. is still honoring the spirit of its trade commitments.
I think the president is trying to up a little pressure on Canada. We saw this in the case of Japan as well. So I think he's still posturing a little bit, trying to create an environment where Canada might be willing to give up a little bit more.
This isn't the first time Trump has used tariffs as leverage, but this time, Canada isn't giving in. The Prime Minister's position is supported by provincial premiers and trade officials. Their consensus, a rushed deal made to avoid a tariff deadline, is more dangerous than no deal at all. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc echoed this view after high-level meetings in Washington, emphasizing that any agreement must deliver long-term stability for Canadian workers. Meanwhile, Carney continues to resist short-term pressure tactics, arguing that Canada needs structural guarantees, not just temporary relief.
So Canadian companies that sell things to the United States, almost 30% of them are now redirecting to other countries, so they're starting to diversify who they trade with.
The political battle is spilling over into the economy. According to a July 2025 report by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, nearly 30% of Canadian exporters have already begun shifting trade away from the U.S., and 37% of companies say they are now sourcing components and inputs from non-U.S. suppliers. This isn't just a short-term pivot. For many firms, it reflects a deeper shift in trust. After decades of economic integration, Canadian businesses are hedging their bets, diversifying markets, reducing reliance on American buyers, and building more resilient supply chains. And that may eventually cost the US too, because when Canada rewires its trade model, America loses not just a customer, but a partner. So why isn't Canada racing to sign something before August 1st? The answer lies beyond the headlines. In 2026, CUSMA faces a mandatory joint review, an opportunity to revise, restructure, or even renegotiate the entire agreement. For Carney, that review is the real battleground. And to enter it from a position of strength, Canada cannot afford to settle now. Sources close to Ottawa suggest the government is preparing a broader economic security framework for future negotiations, one that ties defense cooperation, Arctic sovereignty, and clean energy into the trade equation. In that context, a quick fix with Trump could weaken Canada's position in a much larger game. The August 1st deadline is looming, but no agreement is in sight. The United States is preparing to raise tariffs. Canada is preparing to absorb the blow. What we're witnessing isn't just a tough phase in a long relationship. It may be the beginning of a fundamental shift. Trump is demanding results now. Carney is planning for what comes next. And the space between those two strategies? That's where the future of North American trade is being rewritten.